look at that. Look at that. That is crispy and glorious HD definition right there. I didn't know that I was able to do that. You can actually see that I have a face and like facial features and all that now. Isn't that nice? Isn't that great for you guys? What is up, all? Today we're going to tackle, or start to tackle, because God knows it'll take me a case of beer and probably a week to untangle this thread, as it did the last thing. That if you watched last night, you will see that I was finally triumphant over my over what's been bothering me recently. So, but we are going to try to unravel. Sorry, I'm cleaning off some of this shit on my desk, so when I inevitably hit my desk in anger in a few minutes, or excitement even, I won't break stuff. So, we're going to try to tackle... First of all, we're going to watch something hilarious together. And then, because now I'm feeling all fancy, and like I can really do this streaming shit, because I showed you guys a video last night. But then after that, and probably as part of that, we're going to talk about having the talk with boomers and Gen Xers that have the brainworms that we so often like to discuss. So first, let's watch the funny thing. Let's do it. There he is, our big wet boy. Our big wet boy. Hold the phone. This is very annoying that I have to do this, but sorry. Alright. There he is, our boy. The big man, the man in charge, the guy. Alright. Here we go. I hope that you're able to hear this. You are. Oh, no you're not. Hold on. A choker. They choke. Couldn't you have done something different? Couldn't you have wrestled him? You're not comparing it to golf, of course, right, sir? You wouldn't be doing that. Probably it was a choke. You make the evening news for weeks. If only that were true. So, how do we like that? Are we loving that, folks? Are we about that, folks? How do we like it? How do we like our big wet boy? Yeah. And sometimes they're chokers. They're just chokers, folks. Sometimes they just choke. You know, like in a golf game, they choke. Come on, man. Come on! Ah. Look at Tori coming in clutch. Wait. No, you can. You can too, you liar. Can you guys hear me? I hope you can. I hope I'm not wasting my time. I mean, I could be for sure. Here, hold on. Let me turn this fan off. I'm sure you're hearing my fan. You were watching, but I changed it, so now you can see it. In hindsight, not so awesome that you can read all my text messages while I'm on my stream. So I'll just do this little dealie right here. All right, so what do we think, folks? What do we think? They're just chokers? These cops that hurt people, they're just chokers? I tend to agree, right? I tend to agree that, yes, the cops that end up shooting people, they are chokers in the sense of, like, they're faced with a life and death decision, and they are so committed to the idea that the most important thing in their daily life and in their daily interactions with United States citizens, that the most important thing that comes out of that, not that they protect someone, not that they prevent a crime, not that they prevent future crimes, or maybe fix the situation that has put that person into the situation that they are responding to. No. The most important thing in their day-to-day life and in their encounters with American citizens is that they leave that encounter unharmed and safe, and that they get to go home. Right? And it is a human instinct to want that to be the case. It is a human instinct for you to, if you were in a situation like that, for you to, as part of your job, be like, well, yes, I'm in this life and death situation, and so it is more important to me that I get out of this life and death situation on the life side, and that is going to be the most, that's the most important thing that I can get out of this, right? That's totally human. That's totally regular shit. Except the job requires that you tamp that down, right? And don't, people like to act like this is unheard of. That this is like, well, you can't expect people to do that. We expect people to do it in the military because the rules of engagement are such that you're not allowed to just fire on people when you feel in danger. There are certain ROEs that you have to follow while you're engaged in war or on the battlefield or whatever. Oh, look, an ad. You know what? You really snuck that one in on me, you little punk. Alright, we go back to grainy Kyle. Sadly enough. I downloaded this app to make my phone my camera so that you guys could see me better, but that did not work out. So, piss on that. I'll be grainy. So, the idea being like, we already expect this of certain employees of the government in our military. Like, look, you're going into this knowing that you are going to be in a dangerous situation, that you're going to be in a situation where you are going to have to choose between your life and the job that you've been asked to do. We already asked people to do this. And the idea that we can't ask law enforcement to do this is bizarre, right? It's and when we do ask that of them, the response that you get from people is, well, you're being unfair. You can't possibly know the sort of danger that they're in. Let me break something down for you. As a matter of fact, I'm going to real-time Google this. Police most dangerous job. Let's just find out, right? The 25 most dangerous jobs in America. Okay, here are the 10 most dangerous jobs in America. Okay? Think to yourself, what do you think that these 10 are, and where do you think police officers fall? Okay? The 10 most dangerous jobs in America. Number 10. Okay? And I'm not going to give you the numbers on deaths and all that kind of stuff. I'll just tell you 10 through 1. Number 10 is the first line supervisors of landscaping services. It's number 10. Number 9, first line supervisors of construction. Number 8, Structural, iron, and steel workers. Makes sense. Number 7, farmers. Number 6, drivers slash sales workers, so like traveling salesmen and stuff like that, and truck drivers. Number 5, trash and recyclable materials collectors. Now you're thinking police should come up, right? 4, roofers. 3, aircraft pilots and flight engineers. 2, fishermen. And number 1, this has got to be it, right? Nope. Logging workers. Less police are killed at their job, and as a matter of fact, this takes into account non-fatal injuries also, just being hurt on the job. More people are hurt doing these two things than police officers. Now, am I saying that it's a job I would want to do? Am I saying that it is a job that I would recommend my children do, or that it's something that I think is not dangerous at all? Of course not. Let me see if I can find police on the top 25. Okay. Police actually end up being, police and sheriff's patrol officers end up being number 14. For every 100,000 police and sheriff, 14 are killed every year. Okay? Excuse me. Compare that to the number 1 we just talked about, which is 135, 10 times more lumberjacks are killed or injured than police. Now, you might say, Kyle, yes, but they're not dealing with the unpredictable general public. They're not dealing with people who might be armed. They're not dealing with people who might have a problem with drugs or a past criminal record or a violent history. Sure, you're right. You are absolutely correct. And that is why the average lumberjack makes $37,000 a year and the average cop makes $60,000. So ask yourself, is this that dangerous of a job? And if it is, right, there are entire television shows that are in our culture that are crafted around lumberjacks, deep sea fishermen, truck drivers, these people that literally go into a job knowing, ice road truckers and shit, go into a job literally knowing I am going to put my life on the line doing this job, but I do it anyway. And they are normally, let's see what fishermen make, just for giggles. Logging workers. Yeah, fishermen make $27,000 a year on average. So for half of the pay, these people go into these career fields and they say, yeah, I could probably die. Right? But they go into these career fields knowing the risks for less money and do the job. And they do the job mostly as they're asked. Right? And they provide a useful service to society. We need wood. We need fish. Gotta happen. Right? This is an essential service. And you can make the same argument for police. But police get paid 2-3 times more. They are injured or die at a 10% clip versus these other people. And yet, they demand to be armed. They demand to be armed to the teeth with ex-military equipment and just this endless amount of paramilitary bullshit that makes them look like, Ghost Recon everywhere they go. They demand the majority of localities' budget so that they can pay for things like training and tactical units and terrorism response and drones and surveillance equipment. Right? And yet, when they are in a life and death situation, they overwhelmingly choose to take the life, clearly, make the choice to take the life of the citizens that pay their salary, that they have been employed to protect. Now, why is this? One contributing factor would be the fact that most police officers, much like teachers, do not actually live in the communities in which they work. There are some police departments that offer incentives for locals to work within their the community that they live in, sure, and that's an option for some people. But the overwhelming majority are cops that they're paid fairly well, so they live in the suburbs, but they police the urban areas. And what do we know about the relationship between largely white people who live in the suburbs and their opinion about largely not so much white people who live in the urban areas? What do we know about the opinions that those people hold about those people? They're not very good, folks. They're pretty reactionary. Pretty not good. Pretty not good. And so you are importing these reactionaries from outside of the area they're policing to police people who they are seeing on the news every day as violent criminals bent on destroying little white girls and stuff. So you are providing the seedlings for the violence that is breaking out, because of course, you know what happened the second that this reactionary kid in Kenosha decided that the good thing to do would be to just take his assault rifle into the city area where they were having protests, and he's from elsewhere. He shoots 2 people. Right? Because of course. And there are so many systemic reasons for this. The first being, we have a local media system in this country that is largely owned by one company called Sinclair Media. Sinclair Media's ownership is incredibly conservative. They are very right-wing. The richest, most reactionary right-wingers own Sinclair Media. And you can look this up. If you go to YouTube and you type in identical news reports or local news reports or something like that, you will find tape after tape after tape after tape after tape of city after city having their local news on, repeating the same story. There's one that I remember in particular about Amazon, that Amazon was looking to relocate their big new headquarters that everybody was just like frothing at the mouth about, and these local news stations just all their correspondents got on TV in their city and read off of a script of how great Amazon was going to be, and Amazon would bring so much economic prosperity to the area where they were I mean, it was word for word. And so it is clear that there's coordination at the highest level of this media company, which you would expect because it's a media company. And if I'm going to invest my money and my time into owning hundreds of news stations across the country, you better fucking believe I'm going to know what's on them. And they're going to fit my financial interests because I've invested my money and my time and my effort. So you better believe that I'm going to make sure that I control some of the narrative at least. So you've got these people who are watching local news, and if they're not watching local news, they're watching national news, which is even worse. Because I would bet that the overlap of people who watch Fox, the Venn diagram of people who their main news source is Fox News, and police officers, that Venn diagram is pretty damn close to a circle, I would imagine. Right? And if it's not, then that other circle is local news. And so they are inundated with this. Last night there were 14 drive-by shootings, and last night this black guy shot this little white lady for no good reason, and last night a black guy robbed a store, and last night a Mexican guy broke into this house, and story after story after story after story of reactionary alarmism. Oh my God, isn't it scary what these minorities are out here doing in our communities, right? And so these people develop these deep held beliefs of like, oh yeah, the only way that we can possibly police these areas is if we keep an eye out for those minorities who are always committing the crimes. And so maybe that's a good segue into the how to have the talk. Right? So Labor Day's coming up, which means that we are very close to kind of the last leg of the presidential election, which means there's going to be a lot of heated conversations between family members, I would assume, about what is going on politically. And if you haven't already written off everybody that disagrees with you, then the conversations that are going to happen are going to be pretty fucking insane. And so I think it's worth talking about how we handle these people, and these people being your Boomer and Gen X relatives who are leaning in a right-word fashion toward kind of, not really conservatism, because I think those people are fairly easy to talk to, but actual Trumpism is more of the important thing. And so here is a guideline for having a conversation with those people. Fucking don't. Just don't do it. These people are a waste of time. You are not going to move them. You are not going to convince them that you are not a Marxist, socialist, Stalinist, Leninist, anarchist with a mind for destroying the fabric of America. You're not going to do it. Your time as a fairly educated individual is way better spent trying to find people who are in the third cluster that we have talked about, which are the people that generally do not really identify with the party because they don't give a shit about politics. This is your video game playing cousin that posts memes all day about how well, you know, if the aliens were real, do you really think they'd tell us? Or they have the cure for cancer, but it's not as much, you know, it's not as useful to them as the medicine, so we'll never get it. Those people who are, you know, fairly uneducated about the political realities of America are actually the people who you need to spend the time talking to, because they are open to a wide range of ideas. But the people who have already decided that our big wet boy with his they're kind of like golfers routine that he just did, because all of Trump's everything Trump says is stand up. He's just doing stand up. He's just doing, have you ever noticed that the hair dryers don't work like they used to anymore? Like, he's just doing stand up, and he should not be taken seriously because he's just working a crowd. Everybody that hasn't bought that story, everybody that hasn't said, like, okay, Trump's my guy, and I'm going to put the flag up in the front yard, and yeah, he's my guy. And we got to write off the people that have already said Biden's my guy also, right? Like, Biden's my guy, and you're not going to change my mind. Those people, you got to write those off too. But more importantly, the people that we need to talk to are the people who are undecided. That is a good use of your time. And I'm not talking about, you know, we've talked about, like, fact shaming and article blasting people to death in the past. I'm not talking about inundating these people with, like, New York Times articles about how great Democrats are or about how terrible Republicans are. Nobody cares. I'm talking about expanding these people's worldview. So in the example that I gave earlier of your, you know, video game cousin who is posting about how the media is just lying to you, right? Or here's perfect. This is a good time to talk about something near and dear to my heart, right? These are some of the people that you can get. The people who generally don't talk about politics publicly, but are spending their time posting about the hashtag Save Our Children thing. These people might be movable. And let me work through this a bit. These people know that there is an issue. They see that there is a problem. They're not sure what the scope of the problem is. They just know that over the last 5 to 10 years, they've heard a lot more about child trafficking than they ever had in their lives. And so they have some sort of conscious awareness that it is an ongoing problem. And in that vein, they are trying to exert their will a little bit on that issue by spreading awareness about it, because they are concerned, which of course everyone should be, about child trafficking, right? Of course. But they are missing the forest for the trees, right? They are sitting there staring at the hashtag Save Our Children problem, and they are saying, there are thousands of people in this country who are just scooping children off the street, throwing them into the back of a van, and hiding them in a trailer park. And why isn't the mainstream media talking about this? And, Operation Not Forgotten, or whatever the hell it is that they're calling it, or Never Forgotten, or something like that. Whatever the hell it is that they're calling it, where they're going and rescuing these children, right? Which is an honorable cause. And, of course, we want, if you're going to have law enforcement, then they might as well be doing shit like that, like solving actual crimes, versus like beating the shit out of people on the side of the road because they, had a gram of weed on them, or they talk back. I would much rather that if we're going to have this, ridiculously armed police force that is exerting authoritarian pressure on American citizens, I would much rather that they were doing that and solving crimes through doing that. That would be great. So, yes, this is a noble cause, and sure, I'm sure that it is happening, right? But this is a case of what we were talking about the other day, which is you have to widen these people's lens. And you have to explain to them that the reason that story and these articles about how they're rescuing children by the dozens and the whole Operation Never Forgotten thing, the reason that this is getting traction is because the mainstream media and other media is involved in reporting these things because it fits a narrative. They recognize that there is an awareness of this issue. They recognize that people are concerned, and enough has been said now about child trafficking that something needs to be said and something needs to be done. And the media is all about finding a villain. They are about finding a individual or a class of individuals that they can easily point the finger at and say, that is the problem. Okay? You see this with their obsession with Trump, right? Their obsession with Trump manifests this perfectly. If something is going wrong, then we need to, draw a little dotted line and make a little magical maze that gets us back to Trump, and then we can say that's the root cause and work from there. It's the same thing with this sex trafficking thing. They see that people want to hear about sex trafficking because there is a consciousness about it. And they say, okay, how are we going to report on this? Are we going to do actual in-depth reporting on Jeffrey Epstein and on the clearly dozens, if not hundreds, of sexual predators at the highest level of our government? Well, no, of course we're not going to do that, because those people are well connected to the people that we work for. Those people might be the people that we work for. Those people are the people who give us access to the individuals that we want to interview, to the individuals that we want to use as sources, to the individuals who are incredibly valuable to us for ratings when they're on our channels and stuff. So instead of putting a big spotlight on that class of people, which is clearly perpetrating the most amount of these crimes and the most heinous amount of these crimes with zero chance for any sort of accountability or punishment or law enforcement getting involved in doing anything about it. Instead of that, they are devoting an enormous amount of resources to talking about how regular law enforcement is going out and busting regular child trafficking as they would do completely normally. Because that's the way that they can report on this story and maintain their access and maintain their cuddliness with the people at the top of our society, both financially and from a power perspective. And so it makes everybody who's doing the hashtag Save Our Children thing, it makes them feel better because they feel like progress is being made on this issue. But it's not actually tackling the problem that we all know we have, which is that this is for every bit that this is an issue with, like low-level criminals trafficking children, or even like, international cartels or whatever the big boogeyman might be in that scenario, trafficking children, it'll surprise you to know that I'm not familiar with the interworkings of child sex trafficking. But however that works at the not super hyper wealthy sort of like concierge level that a Jeffrey Epstein was providing and facilitating, at the other level that they are doing the reporting on, like I said, it makes people feel good. It makes people feel like we're putting a dent in this and we're going after it. I saw this post on Facebook today, which was like this line of women and their children, right? They're kind of standing in like a photo shoot kind of way. There's probably like 20 or 30 of them, right? And all the adult women are holding like assault rifles. And they all have shirts on that are like, every, 4 minutes or whatever the stat is, a child is trafficked. Or, stop child sex trafficking. Or we don't call the police. Stop hashtag Save Our Children, blah, 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 right? And so you are yet again seeing the media and our society as a collective deputizing people to take care of something that they feel like is not getting taken care of. And this weaves right back into our Kenosha shooter, Mr. Kyle Rittenhouse. That douchebag. He has been fed the same kind of narrative that the hashtag Save Our Children people have been fed. Which is, our society is failing in a very important service that they are supposed to provide. In his mind, it is protecting small businesses from looters and rioters. It is protecting regular citizens from the people who are protesting, right? And in theory, one can never know what this moron was thinking, but in theory, his thought was, based on everything that he's heard, his thought was, this is something that's not being taken care of by our law enforcement, and therefore I have to step in and take care of this. Right? I have to step in now and say, it is now my job to make sure that everybody's safe at this protest. It is now my job to step in and provide security for these small businesses. You're going to start to see that with child sex traffickers. Right? Like, at some point, you are going to have somebody who has been hearing this on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else all day long, and who has also been hearing about it from, like, news outlets like their local news, which we've talked about, or Fox News. And you are going to start to see people who jump onto those websites that'll show you where all the sex offenders are in your area, and they're going to use that as a kill list and start going around and killing people. Now, that might not be today, that might not happen tomorrow, it might not even happen a month from now, but if this trend continues, you will radicalize a crazy person, because that's just what happens. Right? That's just what happens. And so, social media and just the media in general likes to play keep away with these sort of issues. They like to play, yes, there is a big giant overarching problem, but look over here. And this dynamic plays out in a lot of different problems, right? For instance, there is vast, ridiculous, insane income inequality in this country. If you don't believe me, you are welcome to look historically. We have a greater amount of income inequality in this country than they did in feudal England. In the Downton Abbey sort of society. In the time of actual royalty. We have a greater amount of income equality in this country, and probably in the world, but in this country for sure, than they did in feudal England. And so, instead of talking about that and using any sort of media microphone to amplify that that is a problem, what is done instead is we start to look down the ladder at people like illegal immigrants who are coming here and working, doing jobs that most Americans would not want to do for pay that most Americans damn sure would not take. They are not eligible for things like Social Security, Medicaid, food stamps, welfare, any of that. And they become the look over here. They become the look over here. Don't look at that. Don't look at the big giant pile of money that the Walton family has accumulated by literally rotting out every small town's commercial ability by putting a Walmart in every town and aiming to run everybody out of business. Don't look at that. Just look at the illegal immigrants who are coming here and working for cheap and taking your job. They do this also with so-called welfare queens. Right? And this is a diversion tactic that goes back to like the 70s at least, in the way that it's weaponized now. You know, before when Jimmy Carter was president, before Reagan, 76, 77, Reagan was the governor of California. Okay, and a lot of people don't think about this when they think about Reaganism as a ideology. Reagan was the governor of California. Reagan had signed multiple tax increases in California, because if you'll recall or not recall, the people that I say don't talk to, the boomers and the Gen Xers will recall this. In the actual post-World War II prosperity in this country, people there was a mass movement, a mass migration of people to California because real estate was incredibly cheap, and people forget the vast majority of army training to go into the Pacific took place on the West Coast. And so a lot of the men who were coming home from the Pacific knew about California and knew what it was like there, and were like, damn, I could buy cheap real estate out there. I'm kind of living the life, that kind of shit. This is what gave you Hollywood, right? This is what gave you Hollywood as we know it. This is what eventually led to Silicon Valley, is all of this massive amount of money accumulating as mass migration took place in the 50s and 60s. right? So California's economy grew exponentially. Their population grew exponentially. Well, at the time, the tax system was incredibly strange. It was incredibly weird. Here, time out. Hang on just one second. Sorry, it's storming here, so I wanted to make sure I didn't lose my internet. So, California's tax system was incredibly weird. The property taxes, how property taxes were levied on people that were moving out there normally was perceived as very unfair to the people who were living there. And so, Reagan restructured their tax system as a state. And he signed multiple tax increases in California, which created an enormous surplus for their economy. They were one of the most robust economies in the world, like they are today, and they basically filled their coffers with this incredible surplus that Reagan provided by increasing taxes. So in 76, 77, the right wing in this country, led by a few wealthy folks and a few political operatives, made it their mission to convince people that taxes should be lowered, obviously, because the majority of the business community at this point had decided, like, okay, look, we're just going to make our peace with this. There is going to be a certain amount of government regulation. There is going to be a certain amount of union membership that we're going to have to contend with. There is going to be a certain expectation as far as what we have to pay people for a wage, because, now, the reason for that was, most of the working class in this country was white. And so they had a lot of bargaining power because white people just generally had a lot of political power, especially at that time. And so, and because of the political climate that we were dealing with at the time, there was just an understanding that workers were going to demand a certain amount of wage fairness and worker protections. That's just the leadership of large companies in this country and the capitalist class, if you will, in the 50s and 60s had just kind of learned to live with that after spending the entire first half of the 21st century busting unions and literally hiring private police to come and crack workers' heads. They just decided, like, well, we're going to, we just got to live with this, right? We're still going to make money absolutely hand over fist, no problem, and it's going to be great. But we'll give them a little more than we would like to, because that's just the reality of America. And ultimately, they had just signed off on that. But there were a few that hadn't. And so what they did was they mobilized largely the clergy in this country, largely the what we now know as the evangelical right, but more importantly, the leadership of the evangelical right, so preachers and pastors and church leadership, to start to push their congregations in a certain direction. And this direction was eventually going to lead to Reagan. It's the reason that Reagan pivoted in his run for presidency so hard towards that sector of people. It's because they had already built the infrastructure to mobilize all of these evangelicals. And so by the time that late 70s, Reagan starts to cut taxes dramatically in California, right? Because he's basically shaping up to make the argument that I cut all these taxes in California and everybody's fine. So we need to cut taxes across the board on the federal level and get more money back into the pockets of people, which of course was going to disproportionately benefit the top. And so what we'll do is we will cut, we'll cut people's taxes across the board on a federal level, and then everything will be fine. And people will have more money, and won't that be great? And he was able to do that because the surplus that he had created in California was so large that it took several years for them to figure out, oh shit, cutting taxes maybe isn't such a good idea. And you can see that to this day on in different state economies. I used to live in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is an entirely Republican-run state. At every level of government, Republican, Republican, Republican. You probably have a Republican mayor. If you live in Oklahoma, you probably have a Republican mayor, a Republican city council, a Republican school board, a Republican representative of the state Congress, a Republican representative in the state Senate, and a Republican governor. Anytime that you live in Oklahoma now. Right? And if you will look at Oklahoma's economy, they are broke. They are absolutely broke. One, because they've made the decision to balance their economy on the natural gas industry and fracking, which has led to a very economy that does not stay stable. And two, because they have Republicans got the idea to just run on cutting taxes and continuously cut taxes for regular people too, but the people at the top mostly, so much that there is no revenue. There's no way to pay people because you're not collecting any tax revenue. As a matter of fact, I filed income. Oklahoma has a state income tax. I have filed state income tax twice in Oklahoma when I lived there, and they still owe me money, and that was 3 or 4 years ago because they literally cannot afford to pay people their tax returns. Like, that is how broke of a state Oklahoma is. And it is a complete failure. This ideology of cutting taxes is a complete failure. It has not worked. But Reagan was able to mainstream these ideas. And this is why the boomers that you know and the Gen Xers that you know believe the things that they do. Because at the time, Reagan had the same cultural burrowing ability to get deep into people's brainstems that Obama has. Which was basically like he could do no wrong. Right? Now, granted, that's not true among minorities, and that's certainly not true among people who were of the left at the time. But for the most part, your parents and your grandparents, if you look or live anything like me, believe that Reagan hung the moon. And the reason was that he came in and said, we're America, and we have American values, and we're going to get back to American values. Screw that Carter guy who just told you to stop being a consumer and be more of a Puritan. We're going to spend money, and we're going to go out and buy fancy things because we work hard and we deserve it. And in the meantime, here's some more money because I'm going to cut your taxes. And it didn't work, because when you cut taxes, you don't get rid of things like the military. You don't get rid of things like police. You don't get rid of things like bailouts for corporations. No. You get rid of things like teachers and teachers' pensions and social workers and community health care and support for low-income housing or just generally low-income citizens. And when there is no tax revenue to pay for those things, those people are immiserated. And so you create this enormous income inequality gap that we have now. And these are decisions that were made, if you're a millennial, like I am, or a Zoomer, or whatever, you are living in a world built by people that you weren't alive to be a part of those decisions. You weren't alive to get any of the information that went into making those decisions. You weren't alive to vote on any of those decisions, and yet millennials are now the largest generation in the country. Enough of the boomers have died off now that millennials are the largest generation in the country, and look at their economic state. They are immiserated because they were brought up in a world built by Reagan, in an economic world built by Reagan. And in the absence of an actual resistance to Reaganomics and the Reagan ideology, the left the nominal left, the big D Democrats, moved to the right because they thought that that was the only way they could beat Reagan. They were wrong. They were entirely wrong. Because we got Bush after Reagan. But an aspect of American politics that you don't hear much about is that Bush raised taxes. He was a Republican that raised taxes because he saw the problem. Still a cretin and an absolute psycho, of course. But he saw the problem and went, dude, we got to raise taxes. This ain't going to work. And the American people resoundingly hit his ass on the head with a hammer and sent him on down the road, leading to the era of Clinton. And what people will tell you, especially your Gen X parents and relatives, will tell you is that Clinton, if they don't tell you that Clinton is a insane sex predator and just a criminal in every way, because they've already been indoctrinated, in which he is, but if that's their first point, then they've already drank the Kool-Aid of, like, he literally murdered people and Hillary's literally murdered people and, whatever. And so they've already drank the Kool-Aid and they've already bought into this worldview, and so they go on the pay no mind list. Bye-bye. But if they will tell you that they liked Clinton because he left office with a surplus, then they are what we call a low information voter. And this is somewhat because they don't know all of the things that Clinton did and all of the shuffling of our country's resources that Clinton did on a monumental scale in order to accomplish that. And those are things like absolutely gutting welfare in this country, absolutely gutting Medicaid, absolutely gutting food stamps, actual programs that people were in need of then and are even more so in need of now, especially in the age of coronavirus. And so they will tell you that Clinton left office with a surplus, and that's a good thing, which nominally it is. But the way that we got there is terrible. And it reinforced the ideology that because Clinton didn't raise taxes. And so it reinforced the ideology that we could just keep spending money as a country without ever raising taxes. And that really came to its full big boy fruition with George W. Bush. Because George W. Bush won the presidency, and the word won there is doing an incredible amount of work, but he won the presidency in 2000, and in 2001 and 2002 decided that we could export at least 3 foreign wars that we knew about, not to mention all of the other exploratory shit that we were doing in Africa and the Middle East and Asia and everywhere else, and Eastern Europe, that we could do all that and not raise taxes. That we could do all that and it would be free. Because here's the thing, right? If we declared a 19-year war on Afghanistan, but George W. Bush went to the American people and said, in order to do this, we're going to have to raise your taxes 10%, and therefore you're going to lose X amount of dollars per paycheck. I'm going to take 10% of your paycheck to finance this. People might have hit the brakes a little bit. People might have went, nah, for sure, 9/11 was definitely horrible, and we're very upset. But, do we have to do this with ground forces? Do we have to do this with 10% of my paycheck? Can't we just, hire some of those, badass G.I. Joe folks, pay those guys a couple $1,000,000 and send them over there to catch Bin Laden and bring them home? Can't we just do that? Instead of deploying an unbelievable amount of ground troops into an area that was just a quagmire to begin with and spending just an insane amount of money? If people had had to actually pay for that, there would have been less of a political ability for him to do it. But instead, we just continued to spend money on that and never raised taxes. In fact, we cut taxes substantially. Unbelievably so. The Bush tax cuts are I think second only to the Trump tax cuts in the amount of tax revenue that we lost as a country. And we exported all sorts of war while going into debt for it. And this is a tangential way to have this conversation with people that you don't necessarily politically align with. Because, and this comes from Reaganism too, there is a good amount of Gen Xers and Boomers that float around, and their biggest political idea, they have three big political ideas. One is that the debt is too high and we need to stop spending money as a country, and we need to rein in the debt and the deficit, and we've got to get more control of our money because they don't want to owe money to China or whatever the hell. The second is that we have to institute term limits. This is the second big, if we just had term limits, it'd solve all the problems. And the third is, if politicians had to have the same health care as us and the same retirement as us, then our society would be a whole lot better. But they treat all of those issues as if they exist in a vacuum. They treat all those issues as if, that's the only problem. They can see a need to make society more equal, but they only see it with Washington as the enemy. Not Silicon Valley, not Wall Street, not the banks, not venture capital, or foreign investment, or automation, or anything like that. They only see it by painting Washington as the enemy. It's the only way. Because of the Reagan, the run-up to the Reagan administration, which was 4, 5, 6 years of hyper focus on making Washington the enemy. And let's bring this nice and full circle. Who helped to... I'll give you a guess on who helped to launch this idea. On who helped to launch the idea that there are no actual enemies. The only enemy is Washington. And the American people hate Washington. And therefore, if you're going to run in a race, you run against Washington. You don't run against your opponent. You run against Washington and high taxes. Who is it that you think was the pioneer of this idea and won the first election using this tactic? That would be one Joseph Biden. Joe Biden originally hired the guy who ended up running Carter's campaign in '75 against George Wallace, a segregationist in the Democratic Party. But originally, that guy, and I forget his name, Pat something, he was the guy that came up with this brilliant idea of we're going to run against Washington and we're going to run against taxes. And Joe Biden was the first politician to hire that guy, and he was the first politician to win with that strategy. And that strategy was immediately co-opted by the right, and it is the reason that your parents and grandparents have brain worms about the way that government works. Because they are convinced that government cannot accomplish anything, because that is the way that they were taught. That is the way that politics worked when they were 20 or 25. Because, and they were most interested in these things, and these things had the most effect on their lives because they hadn't entered a actual career-based economic position. They hadn't entered an actual position where they were going to, where they were fairly solid, regardless of the way that politics swung in this country. Financially, I mean. And they were already incredibly privileged for the most part because if they're anything like my family, they were white. And so that generation has been convinced that the enemies are taxes and the government, and that the government can't do anything wrong, can't do anything right. When in reality, can't do anything. When in reality, the government can do whatever it wants whenever it wants it. You just saw them write a blank check to every major corporation in this country as COVID response and only give the people $1,200 a piece. They've completely dropped the ball on unemployment expansion. The only two states that are currently fulfilling the extra $300 that Trump wrote an executive order for are Texas and Arizona, I think. Because they're the only states that can afford to do it. Don't quote me on Arizona. Might be somewhere else. But Texas for sure. They're the only states capable of doing it because they're the only ones that have the money. And so the reason that this was all the pillar that this was all built on is post World War II. Energy costs in the United States were extremely, extremely cheap. We were in the early days of importing foreign oil. We were in the early days of oil drilling on our own land. And crude oil was very, very cheap. And fossil fuels in general, very, very cheap at the time. Coal, very, very cheap. And so energy costs in America were cheaper than they were in the rest of the world, and that allowed us to be able to start businesses with very low overhead, build manufacturing, an enormous amount of manufacturing with very low overhead. And this is what gave rise to the age of prosperity from the end of World War II until the 70s. And rising energy costs and energy shortages are what led to the stagflation and eventual inflation that took place in the 70s and the 80s that Carter tried to stay off by inducing it, and that Reagan just completely ignored and cut taxes anyway. And so it has been burrowed into these people's brains that we can do whatever we want as a country, but as soon as you start increasing people's taxes, that's communism. What people are failing to realize, and what a lot of people who try to have this conversation with their older relatives fail to even mention or think about, is that post-World War II, in the early 50s, well, really in the 50s, throughout the 50s, the highest marginal tax rate in this country, and let me break that down for a second before somebody has a heart attack. Marginal tax rates work like this. If your tax rate is 30% for your tax bracket, so say you make $120,000 a year, and these numbers are not going to be accurate. I'm just doing some numbers. Let's say you make $120,000 a year, and your tax rate is 30%, right? That's the tax rate for your tax bracket. So you pay, for just round numbers, I don't even know if this is right, about $40,000 a year worth of taxes, and you take home $80,000. Okay, but let's say that one year you get a raise. Or you change jobs and you get a $20,000 raise, and you now make $140,000 a year, and that bumps you up a tax bracket so that your taxes are now 35%. You don't pay 35% from 0 to 120. That's not how it works. You still pay your 30% on that amount of money made. It's the additional 20 that gets that other 5%. Okay? So that being said, people do not recognize, and they do not bring it up to people when they are trying to make a point about taxation in this country, especially their older relatives, that the marginal tax rate post-World War II could get as high as 90% in this country on people who were making over $1 million a year. Now, that doesn't mean that if you made $1 million, you only got $100,000. That's not what that means. It means that for every dollar you made after you made $1 million in a year, you paid 90 cents to the federal government. That's not the case anymore. The last time I checked, and I could be wrong on this, well, here, we have a magical box that will tell us. Highest marginal tax rate 2019. Wow. The highest marginal tax rate in this country is now 37%. 37. So we went from 90 to 37. Let me make sure. Highest marginal tax rate in U.S. history. Let me just make sure before I tell you wrong. Yeah. Oh my God. 1944. Okay. If I remember correctly, the year we won the war, I'm pretty sure. Or was that 45? I don't know. Whatever. 1944. 94%. On income over $200,000, which is equivalent to $2.86 million. So, in today's money, if you made more than $2.86 million in a year, every dollar over that, you would pay 94 cents to the federal government. Okay, so, now, let's play a little math. Jeff Bezos, income, 2019. Let's just play. Okay. Oh, okay. Hold on a second. How much money Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos makes every day? Okay. Week, day, hour, minute, and second. Okay. His current net worth is $137 billion. This is old. He's actually worth over $200 billion now. And I know I pick on him a lot, but he's just easy. There are several people like him. I can't be bothered to learn their names because they're all cretins. Oh, here, let me close this so you can... Oh, no, I hit the wrong thing. Let me close this so you can see what I'm doing here. Display capture 0 to window Okay. All right. From his annual earnings. So his annual earnings are $78.5 billion. So let's do a little quick math. And a boom quick maths. Well, my calculator takes forever to open. Okay. Let's do a little quick math. We'll do this together. Okay. He makes 78 and a half. This is a lot of zeros. $1 billion per year. Okay. Oh, wait. $78.5 billion per year. Now, we know that at the time, the top tax rate started at $2.8 million per year. So let's just call it, let's give him an extra little bit, right? And call it $3 million. Okay, so that leaves him with $7,849,700,000. Do I have too many zeros there? I think I do. Hold on. Dang, numbers are hard. 78, 500 million, right? Yeah, right? No, that's 500,000. 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool. So that's 78.5 million minus 3 million. Okay, so that leaves him with $78,497,000,000 to take home. Okay, and this is no, that would be affected by taxes. Okay, so if we kept the same tax rate, right? So we want 94% of his money. That would net the federal government $73,787,180,000. Now keep that number in your mind. We're just going to call it 73 billion for how much would it cost to eliminate homelessness in the United States? How much would it cost to end homelessness in the United States? According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, it would cost... Let me just move this over so you can see this. It would cost $20 billion to end homelessness. That was in 2013. So let's double it, just to be fair. Let's double it. Let's say that our homeless problem has gotten twice as bad since 2013. So that would mean that we need $40 billion. Now, I would assume that this is a cost per year because those are recurring costs. You've got to put people in houses. You've got to set up public housing and programs for those people and all that sort of thing. So let's say that's per year. So, we could eliminate homelessness, and then here, let's see. How much... So, let's grab his money again, and we will take away 40... 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that leaves us with still $33,787,180,000 of Jeff Bezos' tax money. This is one guy. One guy. How much would it cost to send every American to college? To eliminate undergraduate tuition at 4-year public colleges and universities. This is from the Senate website, specifically Bernie Sanders website, Bernie Sanders Senate website. This legislation would provide $47 billion a year per year to eliminate undergraduate tuition and fees. So for everyone to be able to go to a public college or university in this country for free, it would cost $47 billion per year. So imagine if we taxed the Waltons or Amazon in general. You know, like here, let's see. People who made the most in 2019. Oh, I'm sorry. Americans who made the most money in 2019. 114 billion, Jeff Bezos. So it's actually more than we calculated, and that would provide us with more than enough money to do both of those things. Bill Gates, 106 billion. Warren Buffett. These are their actual. This is their actual wealth. But still, right? Annual earnings, $78.5 billion. Every second, Jeff. This is an amazing infographic. Jeff Bezos, every year, or every second of the day, and this is not seconds that he's awake, this is every second of every day, makes $2,489. Just sitting. $8 million an hour, $1.5 billion a week, $6.5 billion a month, $215 million a day. Let's see. How much does the average American make in a lifetime? The average person earns $2.7 million over their lifetime. And how much does Jeff Bezos make in a day? Oh, $215 million he makes in one day. Now, you're telling me that Jeff Bezos works, let's just call it 100 times harder than the average American does in their entire lifetime? In their entire lifetime. 100 times harder. And let's say, right, Jeff Bezos making $78.5 billion a year, right? 78.5. Let's say he's the head of Amazon and making this kind of money for the next 20 years. He's going to make $1.5 trillion. So you're suggesting that, hey Google, what's 1.5 trillion divided by 2.7 million?
The answer is 555,555.555556.
You're telling me that that Jeff Bezos is here. You're telling me that Jeff Bezos is worth more than 555,000 human beings' lifetimes in 20 years of work? He's worth more than, you know, I don't know, 2% of the United States population's lifetime earnings than in 20 years worth of work? I'm sorry, bro. I'm sorry. It's just not the case. So, yeah. That was fun. We did some maths together. We learned things. I feel like we